They thought they could take my lake, until I showed them who really owned the water. I never expected a letter from a law firm to change my life. It arrived in a crisp white envelope with the return address of Hargrove and Associates, a firm I'd never heard of, postmarked from the county seat 2 hours away. The envelope felt heavier than it should have, as if the paper itself carried weight. Inside was a single sheet of thick stationery, folded once, and a certified copy of a document that looked ancient, yellowed edges, faded notary stamp, dated 1947. The letter began politely. "Dear Mr. My name, we represent the estate of your late great-uncle Elias Whittaker." Elias. I'd met him only once as a child, a quiet man with a white mustache who smelled of pipe tobacco and lake water. He lived alone on the outskirts of town, in a cabin that overlooked what locals called Whittaker Lake. I'd heard stories, how he bought the land cheap after the Depression, how he refused to sell when developers came sniffing around in the 80s and 90s. People said he was eccentric, stubborn, maybe a little crazy. No one mentioned he owned the entire lake. The letter explained that Elias had no direct heirs. Through a convoluted chain of distant cousins, my grandmother was his half-sister. The property had passed to me, not just the cabin and the 20 acres of shoreline, the full water rights, the bed of the lake itself, all 2,100 acres of surface water, every drop from the spring-fed inlets to the narrow outlet that fed the creek running toward town. The deed was ironclad, recorded properly, no easements, no public access grants, no mineral reservations. It was mine, every inch of water, every shore, every submerged stump and weed bed. At first I was thrilled. I drove out that same weekend, parked at the old gravel pull-off where the county road dead-ended, and walked the overgrown path to the water's edge. The lake was even more beautiful than I remembered, mirror-flat in the late afternoon light, ringed by tall pines and oaks, no houses crowding the banks except a few scattered cabins on the far side. No jet skis roaring, no speedboats cutting wakes, just birds calling across the water and the soft lap of waves on rock. I imagined weekends here, fishing at dawn, kayaking the hidden coves, maybe even building a small dock. Untapped potential, decades of quiet waiting for someone to claim it. But excitement turned to conflict faster than I expected. I learned the hard way that the town had changed since Elias' time. The area around the lake had filled in with subdivisions during the housing boom of the early 2000s. What used to be empty fields were now cul-de-sacs with identical 2-story homes, manicured lawns, and a shiny new sign at the entrance. Lakeview Estates, a premier community. They had an HOA, Lakeview Homeowners Association, with covenants, rules, dues, and a board that met monthly in the clubhouse by the entrance. The HOA had taken it upon themselves to manage the lake. It started small, a wooden sign at the public boat ramp, which wasn't public at all, reading Lakeview Estates Private Lake Residents Only. Then a gravel parking area with numbered spaces for members. Picnic tables appeared along the eastern shore. A floating swim platform anchored 50 yards out. Someone even installed a small beach volleyball court on a sandy point that technically belonged to Elias, and now to me. I discovered this when I tried to launch my old canoe one Saturday morning in early spring. A man in a polo shirt with the HOA logo embroidered on the chest stepped out from behind a storage shed. "Sir, this is private property for Lakeview residents only. Do you live here?" I explained who I was, showed him a copy of the deed on my phone. He smiled thinly. "That's interesting. We've been maintaining this lake for 15 years. It's part of our amenities package. Everyone pays dues for it." I checked the deed again that night, line by line. No easements, no permissive use clauses. The boundary lines were clear. The water belonged to the upland owner in full fee simple. Riparian rights didn't even apply here. This wasn't a river or stream with shared flow. It was a private, non-navigable body of water entirely within the original parcel Elias had purchased. The next week, things escalated. I received a certified letter from the HOA's attorney. It claimed prescriptive easement through long-term use. They argued the community had openly, notoriously, and continuously used the lake since the first homes were built. They demanded I sign an agreement granting perpetual access in exchange for them continuing maintenance, dredging, weed control, dam inspections. Otherwise, they warned, they would seek a court declaration of public benefit or adverse possession over parts of the shoreline. Adverse possession, on water, I laughed at first, but then I researched. In some states, long use could create rights, especially if the original owner Elias had acquiesced. Had he? Elias had been reclusive, rarely left the cabin. Maybe he never noticed the picnics, the kids tubing, the fishing tournaments. Or maybe he didn't care until it was too late. I hired my own lawyer, a no-nonsense woman named Mara Chen who specialized in property disputes. She reviewed everything and shook her head. You're in a strong position on paper. Full ownership of the lakebed means you control access. You can fence the shorelines, post no trespass signs, even drain sections if you want, though that's a nightmare environmentally. But practically, this is a powder keg. These people think the lake is theirs. They've paid dues for it. Kids have grown up swimming here. If you lock them out, they'll fight dirty. She was right. The first confrontation came at a town hall meeting the HOA called to discuss community resources. 50 residents packed the room. They passed around photos of families on the water, kids catching their first fish. Someone had made a slideshow, "Our Lake, Our Memories." Then the HOA president, a retired accountant named Greg Harlan, stood up. This newcomer claims sole ownership, but we've invested thousands. Dredging alone cost $80,000 last year. If he shuts us out, property values drop. Who wants to live in a neighborhood without lake access? Murmurs turned to shouts. Who does he think he is? Elias never complained. We built this community around the lake. I stood up against Mara's advice and spoke. I didn't ask for this, but the deed is clear. It's private property. I want to enjoy it quietly, not turn it into a public park. The room erupted. Someone yelled, "Then sell it to us." Another, "We'll sue." That night my truck tires were slashed in the grocery store parking lot. Anonymous calls started, late night breathing on the line, then hang-ups. A brick came through the cabin window one evening while I was inside reading. No note, but the message was clear. I began documenting everything. Photos of the unauthorized structures, the swim platform chained to my lakebed, the volleyball net staked into my shore, the private signs claiming HOA control. I sent cease and desist letters through Mara. The HOA responded with their own suit, seeking declaratory judgment that the lake was held in trust for the community, or failing that, an easement by necessity. Discovery revealed more. The original developer had marketed the subdivision as lakefront living, even though most lots were hundreds of yards from the water. Buyers paid premiums for lake amenities. The HOA collected dues specifically earmarked for lake maintenance. But Elias had never signed anything granting access. He died in 2024, alone, still paying taxes on the full parcel. As the case dragged on, I learned the lake's history. It wasn't natural, partially dammed in the 1930s for mill power, then abandoned when the mill burned. Elias bought it cheap, let it return to wilderness. The water was clean, fish plentiful, bass, crappie, bluegill, rare for a lake this size so close to town. I started spending more time there. Early mornings I'd paddle out alone, watching mist rise off the water. The quiet was addictive, but every trip meant passing the HOA's barricades, their glares from the shore. Kids waved, sometimes innocent, unaware. Parents pulled them away. One afternoon, Greg Harlan showed up at the cabin door. No aggression this time, just tired eyes. "Look," he said, "most of us aren't trying to steal from you. We just want to keep what we've had. What if we compromise? You keep title. We get limited access, fishing, swimming on certain days. We handle all maintenance. You pay nothing." I thought about it. The legal bills were mounting. The vandalism continued. My hometown felt hostile now. Part of me wanted to fight to the end. Principle, solitude, the beauty of owning something untouched. Another part saw the human cost. families who'd built lives around this water, who believed it was theirs. I haven't decided yet. The case is still pending. Surveyors are coming next month to mark boundaries. The HOA is talking mediation. Sometimes I sit on the dock Elia's built, rotting now, but still solid, and watch the sun set across 2,100 acres that are mine alone. It's a strange inheritance, a gift wrapped in conflict, a lake that could bring peace or war depending on what I choose next. It was a crisp Saturday morning in late February 2026, the kind where frost still clung to the grass along the shoreline, and the lake looked like polished steel under a pale sun. I was on the cabin porch, coffee in hand, watching a pair of loons glide across the water when the crunch of tires on gravel announced trouble. A white SUV with the Lakeview Estates logo on the door skidded to a stop at the edge of my property line. Out stepped Corinne Whitaker, no relation to my great uncle Elias, thank God, a woman in her mid-50s with a severe bob haircut and the perpetual expression of someone who just tasted bad coffee. She was the HOA president, elected on a platform of preserving our lake lifestyle. In her arms she clutched a thick 3-ring binder, the kind people use when they want to look official. She marched straight across the no trespass signage I'd staked the week before, bright orange, laminated, impossible to miss, and planted herself 10 feet from the porch steps. "This lake is community property," she declared, voice carrying like she was addressing a town meeting. "We've maintained it, improved it, and the residents rely on it. You can't just lock everyone out because some old deed says so." I set my mug down slowly. "Good morning, Corinne. Actually, I legally own it. The entire lakebed, the water column, the shores. Your HOA has no rights here, no easement, no license, no implied dedication. I've had the title searched twice now." She scoffed, flipping open the binder with practiced drama. Pages of maps, old subdivision plats, emails, photos of smiling families on the swim platform. "Historical use," she said, jabbing a finger at a color-coded diagram. "Look, the developer marketed this as lake access. Residents have paid dues for 20 years, dues that funded the dredging, the weed harvesting, the safety buoys. Maps show the community boundary extending to the water. You think a piece of paper from 1947 overrides all that?" I kept my tone even. "The maps you're showing are marketing materials, not legal descriptions. The deed is recorded, fee simple, absolute. Elias never granted anything. No permissive use turns into ownership just because people got used to it." Her eyes narrowed. "We'll see about that in court. Prescriptive easement is real. Open, notorious, continuous use for the statutory period. Here it's 15 years in this state. We've got affidavits from dozens of residents. Kids learned to swim here. Grandparents fished here. You shut that down, you're destroying a community." I'd already run this through Mara Chen, my attorney. Prescriptive easements require adverse use, without permission, hostile to the owner's rights. Elias had been reclusive, but he'd never posted signs or chased people off, at least not that anyone remembered. Silence can sometimes be interpreted as acquiescence, not hostility. The HOA's case wasn't ironclad, but it wasn't frivolous either. Courts hate upending long-standing community expectations. Still, I wasn't backing down. "If you believe that, file your suit. In the meantime, this is private property. You're trespassing right now." She laughed, a short, humorless bark. "Trespassing? We built half the things you're looking at. That dock over there, HOA funds, the path to the beach, volunteer hours. You're the one who's new here trying to take what's ours." She turned on her heel, binder under arm, and strode back to her SUV. But not before snapping a photo of me on the porch with her phone, probably for the inevitable complaint letter to the board. That afternoon I called Mara. "They're doubling down. Corinne just came onto the property uninvited." "Document it," she said immediately. "Everything. Timestamp photos, video if you can, and start aerial documentation. The boundaries are irregular, coves, inlets. Ground surveys miss things. Drone footage will show exactly where their structures encroach on your lake bed. I'd never flown a drone before, but I ordered a mid-range model online that night, 4 propellers, 4K camera, GPS stabilization. It arrived 2 days later. I spent the weekend practicing over the open field behind the cabin, learning the controls, checking local regs. No-fly zones, privacy considerations. Nothing restricted low passes over my own property. First flight. Early March, wind calm, sky overcast to cut glare. I launched from the point near the old mill ruins, sending the drone out over the main body of water. It hummed smoothly, camera angled down. I captured sweeping shots of the entire 2,100 acres, pristine except for the man-made intrusions. There was the HOA's floating swim platform, chained directly to submerged posts driven into my lake bed. The volleyball court on the sandy spit, stakes pounded deep. A makeshift pier extending 30 feet out, complete with residents-only sign. Picnic tables bolted to concrete pads on what the old surveys showed as my upland. Even a small buoy field marking swim zones that crossed into deeper water I owned. I flew multiple passes, low enough for detail but high enough to stay legal, about 150 feet AGL. The footage was crisp, timestamps, GPS overlays showing coordinates. One clip showed a group of teenagers launching kayaks from the unauthorized beach area, laughing as they paddled straight across what was now my water. Another caught a maintenance crew in HOA vests spreading herbicide along the edge, chemicals entering a body I controlled. I downloaded everything to an external drive, backed it up to the cloud, and sent copies tomorrow with a log, date, time, duration, notes on what each segment depicted. This proves encroachment, I wrote. No permission, no recorded right. Their historical use is visible trespass. Mara reviewed it that week. Strong stuff, she emailed back. The drone video is admissible. Courts accept it more and more, especially with metadata. It shows the scope clearly. We can use this in a cease and desist or as Exhibit A in a quiet title action if they push. Word spread fast. By mid-March, anonymous posts appeared on the Lakeview Estates Facebook group, grainy screenshots from my drone flights circulating, captioned "New owner spying on us with drones." This is harassment. Someone even suggested the HOA hire its own pilot to monitor the situation. Karen called me directly the following Tuesday, first time she dialed my number instead of showing up. "We know you're flying that thing over the lake. It's invasive, intimidating. Residents are upset." "It's my lake," I said. "I'm documenting my own property. If anyone's intimidated, it's because they've been using it without right for years." Silence on the line then. "You're making enemies you don't need. We can still settle this amicably. Limited access, shared maintenance. Everyone wins." "I'm open to talking," I replied. "But it starts with removing the unauthorized structures. No more platforms, no more signs claiming HOA control. Then we discuss." She hung up without another word. The next weekend I flew again, this time capturing fresh evidence. A new sign had gone up overnight near the main access path, Lakeview Estates Community Lake, private for residents. Someone had chained off the old gravel boat ramp with heavy padlocks. My padlocks, from the looks of it, same brand I'd bought at the hardware store. I photographed the chains from multiple angles, then sent the bundle to the sheriff's office with a trespass report. Not expecting much, small-town departments move slow on property spats, but it created a paper trail. Meanwhile, the cabin started feeling less like a retreat and more like a forward operating base. I installed trail cams along the shore, motion-activated lights near the water's edge. Every creak in the night made me check the feeds. Paranoia? Maybe. But the slashed tires, the brick through the window last fall, those weren't imagination. One evening in late March, as the sun dipped behind the pines and turned the lake blood-red, I sat on the rotting dock Elias had built decades ago. The drone was charging inside. Footage folders were organized, labeled, dated. I had proof now, Not just words on paper, but visuals of the overreach. Karen and the HOA thought history was on their side. But history has a way of being rewritten when the original documents surface and when the camera doesn't lie. I wasn't sure how this would end: mediation, settlement, a long, ugly trial. But for the first time since the inheritance letter arrived, I felt something solid under my feet. Control. By the first week of April 2026, the frost had lifted and the lake had begun to wake up, bass cruising the shallows, mayflies hatching in clouds at dusk. But the real awakening was on the HOA side. What had started as bluster from Corinne Whitaker and her binder full of maps turned into coordinated action. It began with the docks. One Tuesday morning, I woke to the low rumble of a barge engine across the main body of the lake. Through binoculars from the porch, I watched a flat-deck workboat, probably rented from the marina 20 miles downriver, maneuvering toward the eastern cove. Men in orange vests unloaded pressure-treated pilings and pre-cut decking. They were staking out positions for 3 new boat docks, each designed to hold 4 slips. The pilings were being driven straight into the lakebed, my lakebed, without so much as a phone call. I launched the drone immediately. The footage was damning. Close-ups of the barge logo, Lakeview Marine Services, billed to the HOA, GPS-tagged shots showing the proposed dock locations well beyond the upland boundary, into open water I owned outright. One dock was planned directly over a submerged spring that fed the clearest section of the lake. Another would block the narrow channel I used to paddle to the far inlet. I called Mara Chen while the footage was still uploading. "They're installing permanent structures on my property without permission. This isn't a picnic table anymore. This is construction. Take every photo and video you can," she said. "Then send them a formal cease and desist via certified mail today. Demand they halt work immediately and remove what's already in. Copy the sheriff and the county environmental office. Those pilings might require permits they don't have." The letter went out that afternoon. No response for 3 days. Then on Friday the barge returned. This time they brought a floating platform, 20 by 30 feet, framed in aluminum, topped with composite decking. They anchored it in the middle of the main basin and began attaching signage. "Lakeview Estates Floating Recreation Area, residents only." Someone had even painted a crude map on the side showing community access zones that covered 3/4 of the lake. That was when the floating restaurant idea surfaced. A rumor first posted in the HOA Facebook group. Exciting news. Board exploring food barge concept, burgers, ice cream, live music on weekends. Keep the lake vibrant. Attached was an artist's rendering. A double-decker pontoon boat with red umbrellas, picnic tables, speakers, the whole thing branded Lakeview Lakeside Grill. The comments exploded, some excited, others questioning legality, a few asking pointedly about the new owner. I stared at the rendering. They planned to moor it permanently, run extension cords from shore for power, pump gray water overboard. Into my water. I flew the drone again that weekend. The platform was now fully assembled, chained to 4 concrete blocks dropped onto the lake bottom. GPS coordinates placed it 400 yards offshore, firmly in the navigable center but still on my submerged land. No navigation lights, no permit stickers visible, just an HOA logo and a new sign. No fishing, community swimming area only. No fishing. That was the line that finally snapped something in me. I'd grown up fishing this lake as a kid. Elias had let me tag along once, taught me how to read a depth finder, how to tie a Carolina rig. The bass here were legendary, big, bronze-backed, slow-growing in the cool, deep water. I'd planned quiet mornings with a spinning rod, maybe a few friends, catch and release mostly. Now they were posting no fishing signs on buoys around the platform, claiming the area as a swim zone. One buoy even read, "Violators subject to HOA fines." I photographed everything, then drafted my own notice. Large vinyl banners I had printed at a shop in the county seat. Private property. WHITAKER Lake, full ownership. No trespassing, no structure, no unauthorized use. Violators will be prosecuted under state law. I staked them along the accessible shorelines and attached smaller versions to buoys I dropped myself from the canoe. The next morning half were torn down, the rest defaced with spray paint. OUR Lake scrawled in red. Then the letters started arriving. First from the HOA attorney, a thick packet delivered by process server. It included a demand letter asserting prescriptive rights and seeking an injunction against my interference with established community use. A proposed usage agreement that would grant the HOA perpetual, exclusive access in exchange for them maintaining the lake and paying me a token $1 annual fee. A threat: if I refused, they would seek immediate temporary restraining order and pursue damages for intentional interference with contractual relations. Their dues-paying members, plus punitive sanctions. A second letter arrived 2 days later, this one from a different firm, Lakeview's insurance carrier. It warned that any attempt to remove HOA-installed structures could result in liability claims for destruction of community property. They cited the cost of the floating platform alone, $87,000. A third envelope came certified mail, no return address. Inside, a single typed page. We know where you park your truck. We know you're alone out there most nights. Sell the lake or regret it. This isn't a game. No signature, postmark from the local post office. I turned it over to the sheriff's department that afternoon. Deputy Ramirez took the note, my photos, the drone footage. We'll look into it, he said. But unless they make a direct move, it's hard to prove. Small-town stuff, people get heated over property lines. Mara was blunter. This is crossing into criminal territory. Keep every communication. Install more cameras. And start thinking about countersuits, trespass, conversion of property, maybe even slander of title if they keep claiming it's theirs publicly. I upgraded security. Solar-powered trail cams with cellular upload, covering every approach to the cabin and the main shore access points. A chain across the gravel road with a keyed padlock. Motion lights that flooded the water's edge at night. I even bought a small John boat with an electric trolling motor, quiet, so I could patrol the lake at dawn without announcing myself. The HOA didn't stop. By mid-April, they'd added more buoys, dozens marking off swim zones and no-wake areas that carved the lake into HOA-controlled sections. They hired a part-time lake manager, a guy in a polo shirt who patrolled in a small Boston whaler, writing down boat numbers and taking photos. When I paddled out one morning, he motored over. "Sir, this is a restricted area, residents only." I held up the drone remote. "I'm the owner. You're trespassing. Move along or I'll have the sheriff here in 20 minutes. He smirked, wrote something on a clipboard and motored away. An hour later, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Nice boat. Shame if something happened to it." I reported it. Nothing came of it. Burner phone untraceable. That night I sat on the porch with a legal pad, listing my options. File for injunction to remove all unauthorized structures. Seek quiet title to confirm sole ownership. Sue for trespass and damages. Offer mediation, but only after they dismantle everything. Sell to the HOA or a developer and walk away rich but defeated. The last one tasted like ash. I looked out at the dark water. Somewhere under there, Elia's old rowboat was probably still submerged, chain rusted to the stump he'd tied it to in 1978. He'd kept this place quiet for decades. No docks, no restaurants, no rules except respect the water. They didn't understand the scale. This wasn't a neighborhood pond. It was 2,100 acres, deep enough to lose a house in places, long enough that the far shore vanished in morning fog. Controlling it meant controlling something elemental. I wasn't going to fold. The next morning I launched the drone one more time. Flew it high, capturing the full extent of their overreach. The floating platform now ringed with party lights, the new docks half finished, buoys everywhere like a military exclusion zone. I saved the file as evidence, April 2026. Then I called Myra. "Let's file," I said. "Everything. Injunction, quiet title, trespass damages, and add account for civil harassment based on the threats." She paused. "You sure? This could drag on years. Legal fees in 6 figures. They'll fight ugly." "I know," I said, watching the sun climb over the pines and turn the lake gold. "But it's mine, and I'm done pretending otherwise." The papers arrived on a rainy Tuesday in mid-May 2026, just as the lake was settling into its summer rhythm. Water warm enough for the first bass to rise aggressively to topwater lures, dragonflies skimming the surface like tiny helicopters. The process server, a bored-looking man in a cheap suit, handed me the thick envelope at the cabin door without meeting my eyes. "You've been served. Lakeview Homeowners Association v. my name, filed in the Circuit Court of County name, seeking declaratory judgment, injunctive relief, and damages." I opened the complaint on the kitchen table while rain drummed the tin roof. Their claims were ambitious, almost theatrical. Adverse possession of the lakebed and shoreline through open, notorious, exclusive, continuous, and hostile use for over 20 years. Implied dedication to the public community via the original developer's marketing materials and long-term acquiescence. Equitable estoppel, arguing I and Elias before me, had allowed the HOA to invest heavily in improvements, creating a reasonable expectation of continued access. Community entitlement, under a novel theory that the lake constituted a common area essential to the subdivision's value, invoking public policy against monopolization of natural resources. I actually laughed out loud at that last one. Community entitlement. It sounded like something invented in a committee meeting. I forwarded the PDF to Mara Chen. Her reply came within the hour. "They're swinging for the fences because they have nothing solid. Adverse possession on a non-navigable, fully private lake. Almost impossible. No privity of estate, no color of title on the water itself, and Elias never abandoned possession. He just didn't police it aggressively. We'll dismantle this." We filed our answer and counterclaims 2 weeks later. Quiet title action confirming sole fee simple ownership. Trespass ongoing and continuing. Conversion for the structures placed on my lakebed. Ejectment demanding removal of all encroachments. Civil harassment and intentional infliction of emotional distress based on the anonymous threats and vandalism. Request for preliminary injunction to halt further construction and remove existing unauthorized structures pending trial. Discovery began in earnest. Depositions, interrogatories, requests for production. The HOA produced boxes of material, old HOA minutes, dues receipts earmarked for lake maintenance, affidavits from 37 residents swearing they used the lake as if it were their own since moving in, photos of birthday parties on the beach, fishing derbies, even a wedding on the floating platform. We produced the opposite. The original 1947 deed with its meets and bounds description enclosing the entire lake. Tax records showing Elias paying property taxes on the full parcel every year until his death. Aerial photographs from the 1950s, 1970s, 1990s, and my own drone footage showing no development until the subdivision boom. Expert reports from a hydrologist confirming the lake was non-navigable and entirely landlocked within the original boundaries, and a chain of title search proving no easements, no reservations, no grants of any kind. The first hearing, motion for preliminary injunction, was set for July 15 in the county courthouse, a squat brick building with creaky wooden benches and a portrait of a long-dead judge glaring down from the wall. The courtroom was packed. HOA members filled the gallery on one side, Karen Whitaker front and center, arms crossed, flanked by board members in matching polo shirts. On my side, a handful of curious locals, a reporter from the county paper and me, sitting beside Mara in a suit that felt too tight after months of jeans and flannel. Their attorney, a silver-haired litigator named Victor Lang from a mid-sized firm in the state capital, opened with confidence. He projected slides, happy families on the water, HOA bank statements showing $1.2 million spent on lake-related expenses over 15 years, maps overlaying the subdivision with colored use zones that swallowed most of the lake. "Your Honor," he intoned, "this is not merely a property dispute. This is about a community's way of life." The plaintiff has acquiesced for decades. To allow one individual to suddenly revoke that access would be inequitable and contrary to public policy. Mara rose without flourish. "With respect, Your Honor, the law is clear. This is a private, non-navigable body of water. Ownership of the lakebed carries with it exclusive control. There is no public trust doctrine here, no navigability, no dedication, no easement by prescription because use was permissive, or at least not openly hostile during the original owner's lifetime. Adverse possession requires actual possession of the land itself, not mere use of water above it. And the defendant has voluminous evidence: deeds, surveys, tax payments, and recent documentation of trespass." She played my drone footage on the courtroom screen. The room went quiet as the camera swept over the floating platform, the half-built docks, the no-fishing buoys. GPS coordinates flashed on screen, placing every encroachment squarely on my property. Lang objected, prejudicial, lacks foundation, but the judge overruled. "It's demonstrative," he said. "I'll allow it." The judge Margaret Ruiz, a no-nonsense former prosecutor in her late 60s, leaned forward. "Mr. Lang, your clients have invested money, yes, but investment alone doesn't create title. Show me the recorded instrument granting access. Show me the adverse, hostile act before the statute ran. I'm not seeing it." Lang pivoted to equitable estoppel. The defendant's predecessor allowed this use. The community relied on it to their detriment. Mara countered. Elias Whitaker was elderly, reclusive, and rarely on site. Silence is not consent. Reliance must be reasonable. Buying a home advertised with lake access, when the lake was never part of the subdivision plat, is not reasonable reliance. It's buyer beware. Judge Ruiz took the matter under advisement but issued a bench ruling the next week. Preliminary injunction granted in part. The HOA was ordered to cease all new construction and remove the floating platform and unpermitted docks within 60 days. Existing picnic areas and paths on the upland shore could remain pending trial, but no further encroachments. No more no-fishing signs. No buoys claiming exclusive zones. Karen's face when the order was read was a mask of fury. Whispers rippled through their side of the gallery. Someone muttered, "This isn't over." It was. Post-hearing, the harassment shifted gears. Fake reviews appeared on my non-existent business profiles online. A petition circulated in town calling me greedy and anti-community. Someone dumped fish guts on my truck hood one night. The sheriff investigated, but leads went cold. Trial was set for February 2027, months away. Mediation was ordered first. We met in a windowless conference room at the courthouse in late October. Karen sat across from me, eyes hard. Their new offer, $1.2 million for the lake rights, plus a conservation easement allowing limited public use. I countered, full removal of encroachments, $500,000 in damages for trespass and legal fees, and a permanent injunction against future claims. They walked out. Back at the cabin that night, I sat on the porch watching the moon track across the water. The floating platform was gone now, towed away under sheriff's escort the week before. The lake looked wilder without it, the way Elias had kept it. Bass were hitting topwater again, undisturbed. Their claims had sounded intimidating in the complaint pages of legalese, emotional appeals. But in the courtroom under scrutiny they crumbled. Historical deeds don't lie. State water law doesn't bend for HOA dues. And evidence, cold, time-stamped, geolocated evidence, cuts through exaggeration every time. I wasn't laughing anymore. I was calm, ready. The real showdown was still coming. But for the first time, the law was on my side, and the water was quiet. February 14, 2027. Valentine's Day. The irony wasn't lost on anyone in the courtroom when the bailiff called the case. Lakeview Homeowners Association v. my name. Outside, snow flurries swirled against the courthouse windows. Inside, the air was thick with tension and the faint smell of old wood polish and nervous sweat. The trial had been going for 3 days. Day 1. Opening statements. Victor Lang, the HOA's silver-haired attorney, painted a picture of a benevolent community robbed by a distant heir who cared nothing for the families who'd built their lives around the lake. He spoke of children's laughter, summer barbecues, elderly residents who found peace on the water. He called it a shared treasure, held in trust by long use and mutual reliance. Mara Chen countered with calm precision. She reminded the court that this was not a moral tale but a property rights case. She laid out the chain of title, the 1947 deed, the absence of any recorded easement or dedication. The lake is not a public park, she said. It is private land, fee simple absolute. Use without permission does not create ownership. Day 2, witnesses. HOA members took the stand one after another, Corinne Whitaker first. She described the subdivision's founding, the marketing brochures promising lakefront living, the dues collected specifically for lake upkeep. We didn't steal anything, she said, voice steady but eyes glistening. We invested. We improved. Elias never stopped us. He knew what we were doing. Cross-examination was surgical. Mara asked, did Elias ever sign any document granting access? No. Did he ever receive compensation for the use? No. Did he ever post signs welcoming the public? No. So your claim rests entirely on his silence. Corinne hesitated, then nodded. The jury, 7 men, 5 women, mostly local, shifted in their seats. Other residents followed. A mother who said her daughter learned to swim there, a retiree who fished every dawn. Each story was heartfelt. Each one ignored the central fact. The water wasn't theirs to use. Then came our turn. I took the stand on the morning of day 3. Mara walked me through the basics, how the letter arrived, my first visit to the lake, the discovery of the encroachments. Then she handed me the remote for the courtroom projector. Mr. My Name, can you show the court what you documented? I clicked. The screen filled with the first drone flight from March 2026, wide shot of the entire 2,100 acres, pristine except for the intrusions. I narrated as the footage played. This is the floating platform, anchored with concrete blocks driven into the lakebed I own. Coordinates: 38, 7,421 degrees N, 84, 2,159 degrees W. Depth here is 22 feet, clearly submerged land, not upland. Zoom in. Close-ups of pilings, chains, signage. Here's the volleyball court on the sandy spit, stakes penetrating my shoreline. Here, the no-fishing buoy field, claiming 40 acres of open water as a swim zone. Here are the half-finished docks, pilings sunk without permit or permission. I played clip after clip, time-stamped, geotagged, metadata intact. The room watched in silence as the evidence accumulated like snowdrifts. One segment showed HOA maintenance workers spreading aquatic herbicide directly into the water. Another captured teenagers launching jet skis from an unauthorized ramp, wake cutting across what used to be quiet coves. When the last video ended, Mara asked, based on this footage and the surveys, do you believe these structures are on your property? Yes, I said, every single one. Judge Ruiz, still presiding over the bench trial, no jury for the equitable claims, leaned forward, elbows on the bench. She addressed the HOA table directly. Mr. Lang, your clients have heard this evidence. They've seen the footage. They've reviewed the deeds and surveys. Can you explain to the court how, under any theory of law, the association believed it had the right to install permanent structures on private lakebed without the owner's consent or a recorded easement? The room went silent, not a cough, not a shuffle. Corinne stared at her hands. Victor Lang stood slowly, adjusted his tie. "Your Honor," he began, "the community acted in good faith. The developer represented." The judge cut him off. "I'm not asking about the developer. I'm asking about your clients. They knew, or should have known, the lake was separately deeded. Tax records show it assessed separately. No plat included it in the subdivision common areas. Yet they proceeded to build docks, drop anchors, post prohibitive signs. How did they reconcile that with the law?" Lang opened his mouth, closed it. For the first time in 3 days, he had no quick pivot, no slide to project, no emotional appeal. The overreach was laid bare, blatant, systematic, almost absurd in its scope. Corinne whispered something to him. He nodded once. "Your Honor," he said quietly, "we would like to request a brief recess to confer with our clients." Judge Ruiz granted 15 minutes. During the break, the gallery buzzed. HOA members huddled in clusters, faces pale. One woman, someone I recognized from the Facebook group, wiped tears with a tissue. I stayed at counsel table, heart pounding but oddly calm. The footage hadn't just shown trespass, it had stripped away the narrative. What remained was raw, a group of people who had taken what wasn't theirs and convinced themselves it was righteous. When court resumed, Victor Lang stood again. "Your Honor, in light of the evidence presented, my clients are prepared to stipulate to certain facts. They concede that the structures in question were placed without recorded permission or easement. They further concede that the lake is non-navigable and privately owned by the defendant. In exchange, they respectfully request the court consider equitable relief, perhaps a limited license or compensation for improvements made in good faith." Mara rose. "Your Honor, we appreciate the concession, but the counterclaims remain. We seek ejectment, damages for trespass, and a permanent injunction. Good faith does not excuse conversion of private property." Judge Ruiz nodded slowly. "The court will take the stipulations under advisement. Mr. Lang, prepare a proposed settlement framework by end of day tomorrow. If no agreement is reached, we proceed to closing arguments on Friday." As we filed out, Corinne caught my eye in the hallway. No anger this time, just exhaustion. "I thought we were doing the right thing," she said softly. "For the kids, for the neighborhood." I didn't respond. There was nothing to say. The lake had never belonged to the neighborhood. It had belonged to Elias and now to me. That night back at the cabin, I walked to the water's edge. Snow dusted the pines, the lake was still, reflecting the moon like a dark mirror. No buoys, no platforms, no signs, just water. Mine. The turning point hadn't been dramatic. No gavel bang, no dramatic confession. It had been quiet. A judge's question, a long silence, and the slow collapse of a fiction. They could still fight. They could appeal, drag it out. But the absurdity had been exposed, and once exposed, it couldn't be unseen. I stood there until my fingers went numb, watching my reflection ripple across 2,100 acres of hard-won truth. March 28, 2027. The courtroom smelled of fresh coffee and old paper, the same as it had every time we'd been here. Judge Ruiz read the final order from the bench, her voice steady, unhurried, carrying the quiet authority of someone who had seen every kind of dispute and still believed in the law's plain meaning. After careful consideration of the evidence, including deeds, surveys, expert testimony, aerial documentation, and the stipulations entered by the parties, the court finds that the defendant holds fee simple absolute title to the entirety of Whitaker Lake, including the lakebed, surface waters, and all riparian and littoral rights appurtenant thereto. No prescriptive easement, implied dedication, equitable estoppel, or other encumbrance has been established. The plaintiff's claims are denied in full. She paused, letting the words settle. The court further finds that the plaintiff has trespassed upon the defendant's property by installing and maintaining unauthorized structures, buoys, signage, and other improvements without permission or legal right. Judgment is entered in favor of the defendant on all counterclaims. The plaintiff is ordered to remove at its sole expense all docks, floating platforms, buoys, signage, concrete anchors, pilings, and any other encroachments within 90 days. Restore the affected areas of the lakebed and shoreline to their pre-encroachment condition, subject to inspection by a court-appointed neutral surveyor. Pay compensatory damages in the amount of $375,000 for trespass, conversion, and loss of exclusive use, plus reasonable attorney's fees and costs to be determined upon submission of affidavits. Be permanently enjoined from asserting any claim of right, title, or interest in Whitaker Lake absent a recorded instrument from the defendant. A gavel tap sharp final. The gallery exhaled as one. On the HOA side, Karen Whitaker sat rigid, face pale, eyes fixed on the floor. Board members whispered furiously. Victor Lang gathered his papers without looking up. On my side, Mara Chen allowed herself the smallest nod. I felt nothing dramatic, no surge of triumph, no urge to cheer. Just a deep, steady quiet like the lake after a storm passes. Outside the courthouse, snowmelt dripped from the eaves. A few HOA members lingered on the steps, some crying, others staring at me like I'd personally stolen something from their children. One man, someone I recognized from the fishing derbies, approached slowly. "We weren't trying to steal," he said, voice low. We thought it was ours." I met his eyes. "I know, but it never was." He nodded once and walked away. 90 days later, on a warm June morning in 2027, the last barge left the lake. I watched from the point near Elias old mill ruins as workers in orange vests loaded the final sections of the floating platform onto a flatbed trailer. The concrete anchors had been hauled up with chainsaws and cranes, leaving pale scars on the bottom that would heal over time. Buoys were collected like discarded toys. The no fishing signs were gone. The volleyball court stakes pulled, the sandy spit raked smooth. The half-finished docks dismantled plank by plank. When the last truck rumbled down the county road, I launched the canoe and paddled out alone. The water felt different, emptier but cleaner. No chains rattling under the surface, no unnatural hum of electricity running to a platform that never should have been there. Just wind on water, pines sighing, the soft dip of my paddle. I drifted into the main basin, the deepest part, where the bottom dropped away to 40 feet of cold, dark green. Somewhere down there lay Elias' secrets, maybe that rusted rowboat chain, maybe nothing at all. I let the canoe spin slowly, 360 degrees of horizon, all mine, 2,100 acres. No zones, no rules, no HOA logo starring back. Back on shore that evening, I sat on the rebuilt dock, my dock, simple cedar planks on new pilings I'd driven myself with a rented hammer. The sun dropped behind the western ridge, turning the lake to molten copper. I thought about the journey, the letter that arrived like a quiet bomb, the slashed tires, the anonymous threats, the courtroom silences, the drone footage that had finally cut through the noise. This wasn't just a victory over an HOA. It was bigger than Karen Whitaker or her binder of maps. It was proof that property rights, real, recorded, ancient rights, still matter. That a single person, armed with nothing more than truth and persistence, can stand against a collective that has convinced itself it's entitled to more than it owns. Overreach is seductive. It starts small, a picnic table here, a swim platform there. Then it grows docks, buoys, rules, fines, until the fiction becomes reality for everyone except the person whose name is on the deed. Bureaucracies, even well-meaning ones, forget that line. They blur private and public until private disappears. But the law remembered, the deeds remembered, the footage remembered. I stood up, brushed sawdust from my jeans, and walked back to the cabin. Inside, on the mantel, sat the original 1947 deed in its protective sleeve, yellowed parchment, faded ink, Elia's careful signature at the bottom. I'd framed it the week before. I poured a glass of bourbon neat and raised it toward the window where the lake lay dark and still. "To Elia's," I said aloud, "thanks for keeping it quiet so long." The cabin creaked in reply, or maybe that was just the wind. The next morning I woke early, made coffee, and carried a rod down to the water. No jet skis, no laughter echoing from distant beaches, no patrol boats. Just me, the mist, and the promise of a slow retrieve through promising water. I cast, the lure hit with a soft plop. I let it sink, then began the slow retrieve. For the first time in years, the lake answered only to me. July 2027. The lake has settled back into itself. No more barges groaning across the surface, no more chains rattling in the depths, no more orange vests patrolling the coves. Just water, wind, and the slow rhythm of seasons doing what they've done for decades. The scars from the concrete anchors have already begun to soften, silt drifting in, weeds reclaiming the spots where pilings once stood. Nature is patient. It doesn't hold grudges. I walk the shoreline most mornings now, coffee in hand, cataloging small changes. A new beaver lodge in the northern inlet, a great blue heron staking out the shallow flats, schools of minnows flashing silver when I step too close. The quiet is profound. It's the kind of silence Elias must have cherished, uninterrupted, unowned by anyone except the person who paid the taxes and kept the boundaries clear. The court order was final, but victory isn't the end of the story. It's the beginning of a different one. I've spent the last few months thinking hard about what comes next. Shutting the lake down completely, posting no trespassing every 50 feet, chaining every access point would have been easy and legal. But it would have turned paradise into a fortress, and me into the very kind of gatekeeper I resented in the HOA. That's not what Elias left me. He left me stewardship, not a vault. So I'm charting a middle path. First, preservation. I've already contacted the state's Natural Resources Department about a conservation easement. Not full public access, but a permanent restriction against commercial overdevelopment, mining, or industrial use. The easement will lock in the lake's wild character, limit shoreline clearing, prohibit large-scale dredging, protect the spring-fed inlets that keep the water so clean. In exchange, I get tax benefits and the satisfaction of knowing no future owner, if there ever is one, can turn this place into a gravel pit or a gated mega-resort. Second, responsible recreation. I'm not opening the floodgates, but I'm not bolting them shut either. Starting next spring, I'll offer a limited number of day-use permits, maybe 50 a month, lottery system, $25 each. Non-motorized only, kayaks, canoes, paddleboards, swimming from designated shore points. Catch and release fishing with a simple online registration so I can track pressure on the bass population. No alcohol, no fires except in established rings, pack in, pack out. The money goes straight to maintenance. Weed control manual, no chemicals, invasive species monitoring, trail upkeep on the perimeter paths. I've already cleared a small parking area at the old gravel pull-off, gravel raked, a few picnic tables, a composting toilet, signage explaining the rules and the history. Whitaker Lake privately owned, publicly respected. Below that, a photo of Elias from the 1980s, pipe in hand, standing on the very dock I rebuilt. A quiet reminder, this place was loved before it was fought over. Third, and this one still feels like a leap, a small eco-resort. Nothing grand. 4 or 5 off-grid cabins tucked into the pines on the western shore, solar-powered, composting toilets, footprints no larger than 600 square feet each. Screened porches overlooking the water, gravel paths connecting them to a central lodge with a communal kitchen, and a small library of local ecology books. Guests book by the week, maximum 12 people at a time. Guided night hikes, birding tour, catch and release clinics. The idea is immersion, not entertainment. No Wi-Fi, no TVs, no jet skis. Just quiet, stars, and the sound of water lapping at the bank. I've run the numbers. It won't make me rich, but it could cover taxes, insurance, legal fees from the fight, and a modest living if I manage it myself. More important, it keeps the lake working, alive, not frozen in amber. People experience it, respect it, leave it better than they found it. As for the HOA, they've gone quiet. Karen Whittaker resigned from the board 2 months after the ruling. Rumor has it she moved to Florida. The association paid the damages in full, $375,000 wired without fanfare, and dismantled everything on schedule. They even sent a 1-page letter through counsel. The association acknowledges the court's decision and will comply fully. No further claims will be asserted. Cold, formal, but final. I see their residents sometimes. A few wave from the far shore when I'm out in the canoe. Kids still fish from the public creek downstream where the outlet trickles into county land. They don't cross the line anymore. They learned the hard way. Legal boundaries aren't suggestions. Standing on the rebuilt dock this evening, sun low and gold, I watch a bald eagle glide across the basin, wings catching the last light. The water sparkles beneath it, untouched, free, the way it was when Elias first walked this shore. The way it should be. This isn't the end of conflict. It's the end of one kind and the start of something steadier. Stewardship, balance, a place that belongs to me but isn't hoarded, a lake that can breathe. I set my empty coffee mug down, pick up the fishing rod leaning against the rail, and cast into the deepening shadow. The lure sinks, line tightens, and for a moment the world narrows to just the gentle pull of current and possibility. The lake answers in its own time.